All right, so everyone's probably seen that there's a bunch of age verification laws going on. There's a whole bunch of them, and they're coming at it from a million different perspectives. There's Texas and Louisiana laws specifically targeting age verification for websites. But there's also another crop of laws that is specifically targeting age verifications of operating systems. So at varying degrees. So there's laws in Illinois, New York, Colorado, California, and the nation of Brazil, all of which require some level of age verification along with additional features that have to be added in for all accounts on all operating systems, desktop, mobile, server, even the operating system in your smart crockpot and fridge have to have some level of age verification in them. The first one that has taken effect is the law in Brazil. It's also 15.211. It was signed into law last summer. It had a 6-month leeway on it. And as of March 17th, which is about 12 hours from now, the Brazilian government has stated that they reserve the right to begin processing violations for them. And that will happen in theory tomorrow morning. But here's the thing. Almost no company that is falling under the purview of this law has actually complied with the law. So now the big question is Brazil going to follow through with the fines? The fines for which are $9.5 million US per violation. And per violation is described as per person that uses the operating system without having their age verified. So if you've got, do the math, only 10 users of your operating system in Brazil, that's roughly $95 million for having 10 installations. You can do the math if you're like, let's say, I don't know, Windows, and you have maybe a couple more than say 10 installations. But of course, then Brazil is notorious for being kind of wishy-washy, weebly on their laws, right? They enforce some, they don't enforce others. There's a supplementary law related to the Brazilian law that basically leaves it up to the president to determine when and how to actually enforce it. And there's just a whole bunch of unknowns. And to make it kind of more interesting, the Brazilian government back in January published a list of 37 corporations that they're specifically, quote, monitoring for compliance with the law. And that included the obvious ones like Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Valve is on there. Epic Games is on there. All the standard, normal run-of-the-mill people who have app stores or operating systems. But Canonical is also on there, the makers of Ubuntu Linux, as well as IBM, who owns Red Hat, which is Fedora Linux. So Linux is also on the radar for the nation of Brazil for doing age verification for all accounts on all local accounts on operating systems. Again, that kicks off tomorrow. The next law that really hits after that is the one in California, which takes full effect this coming January. And then, of course, we've got Colorado, New York, and Illinois, which have not passed, but are looking like they're smooth sailing to passage as well. And again, all of these require your operating system to know your date of birth, to provide an API for telling all applications how old you are and all that sort of thing. It's crazy. It's absolutely wild. And what's really nutty to me is I started covering this story about 2.5 weeks ago. When I started covering it, I thought, oh man, I am so late to covering this story. Like there's been so many things. I just haven't been able to get to this story, but it's so critically important. And I thought, you know what? I have to at least cover it, even though I'm months late in covering it. No one else had really covered it. Like when I started covering it about 2.5 weeks ago, I thought I was wicked late and it lit a firestorm. It turned out most of these corporations and open source projects were completely unaware of any of these laws until I covered it. So what's really nutty here is I started covering a law in Colorado and California. The California law had already passed. The Colorado law was had passed the Senate and was heading towards the House. When I covered that, at that point, the makers of Ubuntu Linux, Fedora Linux, all the major commercial Linux makers were completely unaware of these laws. They actually went on record stating that they had no idea these laws were passed or passing. At that point, they made an official statement that they were going to look into and figure out how to comply with these laws, which might take effect January 1st of 2027. At that point, I had not yet covered the Brazil law, and the Brazil law takes effect tomorrow. At that point, none of the lawyers for Red Hat, Canonical, any of these companies had thought, let's look and see what other laws might be hitting and biting us in the butt. So then I covered the Brazil law, and now they're scrambling to figure out a response to all this because they weren't aware of that one either. So we now learned a whole lot from this. And to start with, all these major companies are taking their legal advice from the London Journal. So that's fun. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the long and short of it. We really don't know what's going to happen with Brazil. We'll find out tomorrow.
Can we play this out real quick? Just because I'm curious.
I need to take a drink.
Yeah. You said a lot there. Get a nice little swig of your fully sugared Dr. Pepper there. Okay. Let's just say any of these companies, brands, whatever, let's just say they don't. They're like, hey, Brazil, California, Colorado, fuck off, right? Yeah. I'm not paying your imaginary fines, right? That you just want to whip up out of nowhere with your imaginary rules that you just whip up out of nowhere, right? I'm not paying this stuff. What's the worst that could happen?
They go out of business. So here's the problem.
The companies go out of business.
So, yes.
Why?
So because most of these companies have significant legal presences in the jurisdictions where these laws exist. So, for example, the Brazil law. Technically, if a company has no presence in the country of Brazil, okay, what's Brazil going to do? If I'm an American company and I don't even have Brazilian customers, what the hell do I care if Brazil says I have to do something in their country? I'll just be like, okay, never mind. I'm just going to ignore you. Problem is, Microsoft, Apple, Valve, they all do a huge amount of business in the country of Brazil. And even the small players like Canonical, who runs Ubuntu, they have actual presence, physical presence in Brazil. They have Brazilian employees. They're registered as Brazilian companies. They have Brazilian bank accounts. And so in theory, they can minimize, these companies can minimize the total potential damages by limiting how much resources they have in a particular jurisdiction. But if they have resources and employees and bank accounts in Brazil, Brazil can go after all of those. Brazil can seize those. Brazil can garnish those and levy those and put liens on those. They can do all those things in those countries. And for some of these companies like IBM, Red Hat, SUSE, and a whole bunch of other ones, their presence in the country of Brazil is not, two guys and a tin can. We're talking about, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in bank accounts, escrow accounts, office spaces, etc., in those nations, not even mentioning the fact that they have a huge customer bases where they consider Brazil almost to be an entire region where they generate, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in yearly revenue. They can't afford to lose Brazil. Now, it gets a little bit trickier when we start talking about the California law. Right. So the California law is in place. How many of these companies want to continue having their business presence in the state of California? In fact, if you look through the list of all the various operating system makers and app store makers and game store makers, about half of them are headquartered in California. Right. That's where they have their businesses, their banks, and the bulk of their employees. So it's very, very easy. Now, the fines for California are much less insane than Brazil. Instead of $9.5 million, it's $7,500 per violation. However, again, if you have, let's say, 1 million users, 1 million times 7,500, you're going out of business. Like, doesn't matter which company. If you're Apple, you're going out of business, right? The amount of money you're going to lose here is going to be absolutely astronomical. We're not just talking about like a couple million here. We're talking about many, many, many billions of dollars. Now, of course, that's determined on whether or not the government of California actually will choose to go after them. I mean, that's a whole nother unknown, right? Is how will they choose to levy this? But the laws are there just the same. So we really don't know. We've seen smaller projects take a stand and say, we will not comply with this. There's been a few open source operating systems that have said, we just simply won't make ourselves available to California and Colorado and New York and Brazil and whatnot. But the big players don't have that choice, right? They don't really have that option. And so we're just really waiting and seeing how exactly they're going to work with it. Now, one Linux maker, System 76, has decided to fight this in the state of Colorado. They make the Linux distribution Pop OS, and they sell Linux laptops and desktops and whatnot. And kudos to them for taking it on and saying we're going to fight it. And they literally had their CEO go down to the state capitol there in Colorado and meet with the lawmakers who were actually sponsoring this bill. The problem is the approach that System 76 has decided to take is to suggest an open source exclusion, basically make an exemption for open source software, Linux distributions and the like. Which I spoke with the lawyer for 4chan.
All right.
The story gets fun. So the lawyer that represents 4chan, guys, 4chan has been attacked by the UK government and all that sort of thing. A lawyer named Preston Byrne, fantastic attorney. I spoke with him about it, and he's like, yeah, this just makes it more unconstitutional. This actually makes it worse if they make an exemption for open source software. It already is a First Amendment violation. This just makes it like a triple First Amendment violation. And so realistically, an open source exemption is not going to happen for this sort of thing. It's just out of the question. That's where we're at right now. And there are more laws coming down the pipe. A whole lot more laws of varying degrees. The New York law is potentially the most insidious as it applies to anything with an internet connection. So crockpot. It would have to have age verification, and not little age verification. They determine it as commercially viable age verification. So if there's a company out there that does for-profit age and ID verification, if New York says you have to do it, you have to do it on your crockpot.
Wow, what a mess!
Yeah, and it's probably going to pass because it's controlled all the way. It's the parties that are proposing these laws are the ones that own the Senate, House, and governorship of these particular states.
So what you're saying is everyone should go and buy a crockpot now. Because
just not an internet connected crockpot.
Well, why do they even have an internet connected crockpot? What are we doing here? Are we playing like Angry Birds at the same time? Like, what are we doing?
I mean, that's a thing. You can get internet connected crockpots, smart crockpots. That's a real thing. But yeah, they like your fridge, the fridge with the screens on them. Those will have to do age verification according to the laws. Now, the governments could choose to not enforce that, but we don't know what they're going to enforce or not at this point. Right, the laws are intentionally left vague so that they can be applied however those in charge want them to be applied. Everyone depressed now?
Nailed it right there.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. So those are all coming right now. We'll keep watching them, but yeah. So about 12 hours, the Brazil one takes effect, and Brazil might do nothing. They might just realize that this was stupid and just not enforce any of it, or they might go whole hog and enforce everything. We really have no idea.
Wow, what a mess, huh? What a mess. I guess that's really all you can say about that. What a fucking mess.
Get your crock pot early.